Are you sure you're in the right place, Grandpa? The library's across the base, next to the bingo hall. The voice was a cocktail of arrogance and artificial bass, designed to carry across the cavernous space of the Fort Bragg Martial Arts Center. Sergeant Kyle Rhino Davies, a man whose neck was as thick as his condescension, stood with his arms crossed. His two companions, both corporals built from the same mold of muscle and mockery, snickered behind him. All three wore crisp black GIs, their belts cinched tight, emblems of a proficiency they believed made them gatekeepers of this padded domain. The old man they addressed didn't turn. He stood before a heavy bag, not hitting it, but just touching it. His hands, gnarled and webbed with the faint, silvery lines of ancient scars, rested on the worn leather. He was maybe 75, perhaps closer to 80, dressed in simple gray sweatpants and a faded olive drab t-shirt that had likely been issued when Rhino's parents were in grade school. His frame was spare, the powerful musculature of his youth having given way to the lean, sinewy strength of old age. "Just getting my bearings, son," the old man said, his voice a low, calm rumble, tinged with a faint Appalachian drawl. He finally turned, and his eyes, a pair of startlingly pale blue chips, took in the three younger men. They were eyes that didn't just see, they assessed, cataloged, and filed away. Rhino took a step forward, his bare feet slapping the mat. He smirked, a practiced expression of dominance. "Bearings? This is the CQC training floor, Pops. For active duty operators. Not a place for a history lesson. Don't you have some VFW post to be at, telling war stories?" The old man's expression didn't change. He remained profoundly, unnervingly calm. "I served." The statement was simple, a piece of flat, unadorned fact. It held no pride, no demand for respect. It was just a thing that was. "Oh, we all served," old-timer Corporal Martinez chimed in, flexing his tattooed biceps. "But some of us are still serving at the tip of the spear. We're running Tier 1 combatives programs here. We don't have time to babysit." The third man, Corporal Jensen, gestured dismissively at the old man's hands. "Look at those hand wraps. Are those from a museum? We use gel-lined polymers now. Better kinetic distribution. You probably don't even know what that means." The old man looked down at his own hands. The wraps were simple strips of faded white cloth, wound with a practiced precision that seemed second nature. He flexed his fingers, the knuckles like old walnuts. The movement was slow, deliberate, but held an unsettling economy. "They still work," he said, his gaze returning to Rhino. The sergeant laughed, a loud, barking sound meant for the dozen or so other soldiers training in the gym. He wanted an audience for this humiliation. "They still work? Buddy, nothing on you still works. I bet you still think a bayonet charge is a viable tactic. The world has moved on. We're digital now. We're faster, stronger, smarter." The old man gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Is that so?" The quiet challenge in those three words, the utter lack of defensiveness, seemed to infuriate Rhino more than any angry retort could have. His face hardened, the performative mockery giving way to genuine aggression. He stepped closer, invading the old man's personal space. The air grew thick with the smell of sweat, disinfectant, and testosterone. "Yeah, that's so," Rhino growled, his voice dropping. "This is our house. My house. And in my house, we respect the program. We respect strength. You're just taking up space." Behind the front desk, Airman First Class Jessica Riley watched, her stomach twisting into a knot. She was 20, fresh out of tech school, and assigned to manage the gym's sign-in sheet. She'd seen the old man come in, a polite, quiet figure who had signed the visitor log with a steady hand, Silas Vance. He'd smiled at her, a gentle, grandfatherly expression that made her miss her own grandpa back in Ohio. Now, watching these three apex predators of the base corner him, she felt a hot surge of protective anger. It was wrong. It was deeply, fundamentally wrong. The code of the military, as she understood it, was built on a foundation of respect. Respect for the uniform, for the rank, for the flag. And above all, respect for those who had come before. This spectacle was a desecration of that principle. Rhino and his crew, with their advanced black belts and their sculpted physiques, were behaving like schoolyard bullies. Rhino puffed out his chest. "Look, I'm going to need to see your ID. I don't think you're cleared to be in a facility like this. This is for high readiness personnel." Silas Vance didn't move. He simply met the sergeant's glare. I'm cleared. Oh yeah? By who? General Washington. Martinez sneered. The group of onlookers was growing. Soldiers on the weight machines paused their sets. A couple of guys practicing grappling drills stopped and watched. The humiliation was becoming a public event, the stakes rising from simple disrespect to a formal challenge of authority and belonging. Show me your ID, old man, Rhino demanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. Now, slowly, deliberately, Silas reached into the pocket of his gray sweatpants. His movements were unhurried, as if time were a guest in his house, not the other way around. He pulled out a simple, worn leather wallet. From it, he extracted a laminated card. It was an old design, faded and slightly yellowed at the edges. A Department of Defense civilian identification card. Rhino snatched it from his hand. He stared at it, a look of confusion warring with his arrogance. Silas Vance. Civilian. What is this? A contractor ID? What do you do? Fix the plumbing. Something like that, Silas said, his pale blue eyes never leaving Rhino's face. Rhino scoffed and handed the card back. Well, Mr. Vance, the plumbing is fine. This area is restricted. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. He gestured toward the door with a thumb. Go on. Beat it. Silas didn't take his ID back. He didn't move toward the door. He simply stood his ground, a rock in the stream of the sergeant's blustering hostility. The silence stretched, becoming heavier than any of the weights in the room. In that silence, something shifted. The power dynamic, which had been so clearly in Rhino's favor, began to feel unstable. The old man's stillness was not weakness, it was an anchor. I said leave, Rhino repeated, his voice tight with fury. He felt his control slipping, his audience watching. He couldn't back down now. He reached out, not to shove, but to place a heavy, patronizing hand on the old man's shoulder, intending to steer him toward the exit. Let's go, Pops. Time for your nap. The moment Rhino's fingers touched the fabric of the olive drab t-shirt, the atmosphere in the gym crackled. It was a line being crossed. At the front desk, Jessica Riley's hand shot to the phone. Her heart was pounding. She had seen the name on the ID. Silas Vance. It meant nothing to her, but she had also seen the small, almost invisible notation in the corner of the visitor log next to his signature. A string of letters and numbers she had been told to watch for during her in-processing brief. A code that meant notify base command immediately upon arrival. She hadn't understood its significance then, thinking it was for some visiting dignitary or politician. She hadn't connected that quiet old man to such an alert. Now, watching Rhino put his hands on him, she understood. Her training kicked in. She dialed the number for the command post, her fingers trembling slightly. Command post, Airman Sanchez speaking. This is Airman Riley at the West Fitness Center, she said, her voice low and urgent, trying not to be overheard. I have a situation here. I have a Code 7 visitor, and he's being harassed by personnel. There was a sudden, sharp silence on the other end of the line. Airman, confirm. You have a distinguished visitor, Protocol 7? The voice was no longer bored, but sharp with adrenaline. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Silas Vance. He's here. And Sergeant Davies from the 3rd Special Forces Group is... He's getting physical with him. The background noise at the command post erupted. She could hear muffled shouts, the clatter of a chair. Airman Riley. Sanchez's voice was now steel. Keep your eyes on Mr. Vance. Do not, I repeat, do not let him out of your sight. Is the base commander on station? I think so, Staff Sergeant. We're notifying him. A security detail is en route to your location. And Airman, I'm also calling General Thorne's office. Just stay on the line. General Thorne. The name hit Jessica like a physical blow. General Marcus Thorne was the 4-star commander of the entire United States Army Special Operations Command. He was a living legend, a figure so far up the chain of command, he was practically mythological. The idea that his office would be notified about a scuffle in a base gym was so absurd it bordered on fantasy. Back on the mat, the situation was escalating. Rhino's hand was still on Silas's shoulder. Are you deaf, old man? Silas's gaze dropped from Rhino's eyes to the hand on his shoulder. Then he looked back up. You have 1 second to remove your hand, he said. His voice was still quiet, still calm, but it held a new edge. It was the sound of a steel door swinging shut. The insult was too much for Rhino. To be given an ultimatum by this frail relic in front of his men and a growing audience was an intolerable blow to his ego. "Or what?" he sneered, squeezing the shoulder. "You gonna hit me with your cane?" It happened faster than a thought. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't a kick. It was a flow of motion, a poetry of violence so subtle it was almost invisible. Silas's left hand, the one with the gnarled knuckles, came up. It didn't grab Rhino's wrist. It simply cupped it from underneath, his thumb and index finger finding the precise space between the radius and ulna bones. At the same time, Silas's body shifted, not back, but into Rhino's center of gravity. His shoulder dipped. Rhino's world tilted. A bolt of pure, unadulterated agony shot from his wrist to his shoulder, a fire that bypassed muscle and went straight to the nerve. His grip loosened involuntarily. His own forward momentum, which he had been using to intimidate, was suddenly his enemy. He was falling, but not in a way he understood. He felt weightless and helpless. Martinez and Jensen, seeing their leaders suddenly crumple, reacted on instinct. They moved in from both sides, hands raised to grab or strike. They were black belts. They were trained for multiple opponents. They were fast. They were not fast enough. As Rhino stumbled forward, Silas pivoted on the ball of his left foot. The movement was no more than a few inches. His right hand came up, not in a fist, but with the fingers extended and rigid. He didn't strike Martinez. He simply met his charging momentum, the heel of his palm connecting with Martinez's collarbone. The energy transfer was perfect. Martinez's forward charge stopped as if he'd hit a brick wall, and he staggered backward, tripping over his own feet, his eyes wide with shock and pain. Simultaneously, Silas's left elbow, having released Rhino, continued its circular path. It met Jensen, who was coming in from the other side. The point of the elbow didn't hit his face or chest. It connected with the large bundle of nerves on the side of his thigh, the common peroneal nerve. Jensen's leg went completely dead. It was as if someone had flipped a switch. His entire right side gave out, and he collapsed onto the mat in a heap, his leg refusing to obey the frantic signals from his brain. The entire sequence had taken less than 2 seconds. 3 black belts, all in the prime of their physical lives, all trained in the military's most advanced hand-to-hand combat systems, were on the ground. One was groaning, clutching his wrist. One was gasping for breath, trying to understand how a simple palm strike had felt like being hit by a car. One was staring at his own leg in utter bewilderment. And Silas Vance stood in the middle of them, not even breathing hard. He hadn't thrown a single punch. He hadn't broken a sweat. He had simply used their own aggression, their own momentum, against them with terrifying, surgical precision. He stood in the same calm, centered posture as before, his pale blue eyes surveying the results of his minimal effort. The gym was utterly silent. The rhythmic thud of the heavy bags had stopped. The clank of weights was gone. The only sound was the pained breathing of the 3 men on the mat. Everyone stared, their minds struggling to process what they had just witnessed. It was impossible. It defied the laws of physics and biology. An old man had just neutralized 3 elite soldiers without a fight. Just then, the wail of sirens began to cut through the air outside, growing louder with astonishing speed. Airman Riley was still on the phone, her knuckles white. "They're here," she whispered into the receiver. The double doors to the fitness center burst open. It wasn't the 2 security patrolmen she had expected. It was a full fire team of 8 military police in full tactical gear, rifles held at a low ready. They fanned out, securing the room, their expressions grim and confused as they took in the bizarre scene. 3 decorated NCOs on the floor, and a single old man standing over them. But they were just the prelude. Seconds later, a black command vehicle screeched to a halt at the curb. The door was thrown open before it had fully stopped, and a man emerged. He was tall, ramrod straight, with 4 silver stars gleaming on the collar of his perfectly pressed uniform. A crown of silver hair sat above a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. It was General Marcus Thorne. He strode into the gym, followed by 2 aides and the base commander, a full-bird colonel who looked pale and terrified. The general's eyes swept the room, taking in every detail in a single, cold glance. The stunned soldiers, the heavily armed MPs, the 3 men on the mat, and finally, the old man in the center of it all. "Rhino," still on one knee and cradling his wrist, saw the 4 stars, and his blood ran cold. He tried to stand, to salute, to explain. "General, sir, this man, he assaulted us. He's not authorized to be here." General Thorne did not look at him. He did not acknowledge his existence. His gaze was locked on Silas Vance. His entire demeanor, which had been one of cold fury, softened into something else entirely. It was a look of profound, absolute reverence. Ignoring the babbling sergeant on the floor, ignoring the confused MPs, ignoring the pale base commander at his side, General Thorne strode directly to the center of the mat. He stopped 3 feet in front of the old man in the sweaty t-shirt. Then, the impossible happened again. General Marcus Thorne, commander of all U.S. Army Special Operations Forces, a man who reported directly to the Secretary of Defense, drew himself up to his full height. He raised his hand to his brow and executed the sharpest, most perfect salute of his storied career. It was a salute of utter deference, a gesture of respect so profound it was almost an act of worship. "Mr. Vance," the general's voice boomed, echoing in the stunned silence. "It is an honor, sir. I apologize for the reception you've received on my post. It will be dealt with." A collective gasp went through the room. Soldiers' jaws hung open. Rhino's face went from angry to confused to utterly horrified as the reality of the situation began to dawn on him. He was looking at a 4-star general saluting a civilian who had just put him and his friends on the floor like children. Silas Vance finally relaxed his posture. He gave the general a small, weary nod, accepting the salute. "It's all right, Marcus. The boys were just a little overeager." The general dropped his salute but remained at attention. He turned his head slightly, his eyes finding Sergeant Davies. The warmth in his expression vanished, replaced by an arctic cold that seemed to drop the temperature in the room by 20 degrees. "Sergeant," the general said, his voice lethally quiet. "Get on your feet." Rhino scrambled up, wincing. Martinez and Jensen followed suit, looking like they wanted the floor to swallow them. The 3 of them stood in a miserable line, heads bowed. "Sergeant Davies," the general began, his voice a low, controlled torrent of fury. "You stand here in your black belt, a symbol you clearly haven't earned, and you presume to lecture this man on combat. You, who have spent a few years learning a system, dare to disrespect the man who created it." Rhino's head snapped up. "Sir? Created it? You think your fancy Tier 1 combatives program was invented by a committee in an air-conditioned office at the Pentagon?" General Thorne sneered. "You think it was designed on a computer? That program, Sergeant, is a pale, watered-down imitation of a system that has no name. We called it the program. Its creator and sole master instructor stands before you." The general gestured toward Silas. "This is Silas Vance. But in the places where our nation's history is written in blood and shadow, he was known by another name. He was known as Ghost." The name hung in the air, thick with unspoken history. The general wasn't finished. He took a step closer to the 3 disgraced soldiers, his voice rising as he became a storyteller, a historian revealing a sacred text. In 1968, in the jungles of Laos, a 5-man long-range reconnaissance patrol was surrounded by over 200 enemy soldiers. They were out of ammo, their radio was destroyed, and they were all wounded. For 12 hours, they held their position, not with rifles, but with knives in hands. One man was at the center of that defense. He moved between the trees like smoke, silent and lethal. When the extraction helicopter finally found them, they were the only 5 left alive in a square kilometer. The man who led them out was a 22-year-old sergeant named Silas Vance. He paused, letting the image sink in. A memory flickered behind Silas's pale blue eyes. The smell of cordite and wet earth, the slick feel of a knife handle, the desperate faces of his men. The gym faded away for a second, replaced by the suffocating green canopy of a jungle at dusk. He blinked, and the memory vanished. He was back on the mat. After that, the general continued, his voice resonating with authority. The army realized they had something different. Not just a soldier, but a weapon. They pulled him out of the line and gave him a mission, to build a new way of fighting. A way for a single American soldier to be more dangerous with his bare hands than an enemy squad was with their rifles. He spent the next 30 years in classified facilities, places that don't exist on any map, studying every martial art known to man. He broke them down, took them apart, and rebuilt them from the ground up, keeping only what was brutally, unequivocally effective. He blended Filipino knife fighting with Israeli Krav Maga, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu with a dozen obscure arts you've never even heard of. He created a system based on economy of motion, nerve strikes, and anatomical physics. What you three just experienced was less than 0.1% of his kindergarten lesson. He pointed a rigid finger at Rhino. That ID you mocked? That faded civilian card? Turn it over. Silas, who had picked up his wallet, wordlessly handed the ID to the general. Thorne flipped it over and held it up for the three men to see. The back was stark white, with a single line of red text at the top. Project Chimera Alpha below, it was a symbol, a black spade. Project Chimera, the general said softly, as if speaking of something holy. The codename for the program that created the Delta Force and SEAL Team 6. Silas Vance was Alpha, the first, the original. He wrote the book. No, he is the book. Every technique you have ever learned, Sergeant, every submission, every strike, trickles down from the knowledge in this man's head. He has forgotten more about killing a man with his thumb than you will ever learn in your entire career. The general's gaze was relentless. He holds 3 distinguished service crosses, 7 silver stars, and a dozen purple hearts. He turned down the Medal of Honor twice because he said he was just doing his job. He has trained every legendary operator you've ever heard of. The men you have posters of on your wall, they called him Sir, and you called him Grandpa. The word hung in the air, a monument to their catastrophic arrogance. Humiliation washed over the 3 soldiers, a tide of hot shame that was far more painful than any physical blow. They had not just disrespected an old veteran. They had committed sacrilege. Sir, Rhino whispered, his voice cracking. I didn't know. That is the entire point. The general roared, his fury finally breaking its leash. You are not supposed to know. Men like Mr. Vance gave their youth, their health, and their very names to this country so that boys like you could have the luxury of arrogance. Your job is to show respect to every veteran, because you have no way of knowing who you are talking to. You judged a man by his age and his clothing. You, who were supposed to be the elite, made a rookie mistake that would get a private scrubbing toilets for a month. You have disgraced yourselves, your unit, and this entire installation. He turned to the ashen-faced base commander. Colonel, I want these 3 men off my base by sunset. They are to be reassigned to the most remote, miserable post you can find. They will spend the next year teaching basic rifle marksmanship to recruits in the middle of a desert. Their black belts are hereby revoked. They will not be eligible for any special operations training or assignments for the remainder of their careers. Is that understood? Yes, General. The colonel snapped, his voice tight with a mixture of fear and relief. The general turned back to Silas, his demeanor instantly softening again. Sir, on behalf of the United States Army, I am profoundly sorry. We have a car ready to take you to your quarters. I've had your original suite at the VIP lodge prepared. Silas held up a hand. It was a simple gesture, but it stopped the entire whirlwind of military power in its tracks. He looked at the 3 young men, who were now standing with their heads bowed so low their chins were on their chests. He saw not arrogance, but shattered pride. He saw not malice, but the foolishness of youth. Marcus, he said, his voice gentle. Leave them be. The general stared at him, incredulous. Sir, they're just boys, Silas said, a hint of a weary smile on his lips. Full of fire and vinegar. I was the same way once. Maybe worse. He walked slowly toward the 3 soldiers. They flinched as he approached, as if expecting another strike. He stopped in front of Rhino. He didn't look at the sergeant's face, but at his hands. You have good power, Silas said quietly, but you put your whole body into it. All your strength. You telegraph everything you're going to do. You fight with your muscles. He looked up, his pale blue eyes meeting Rhino's. The most dangerous weapon isn't your fist. It's the 3 pounds of gray matter in your skull. And the most important muscle is your heart. But not for anger. For respect. He then looked at Martinez. You charged in blind to help your friend. That's loyalty. That's good. But you didn't see the whole board. You only saw the piece in front of you. Finally, he looked at Jensen. You were the smartest. You tried to flank. But you were too committed to the attack. You left yourself open. He sighed, a long, slow sound. The skills you learn in here, he said, gesturing to the mats. They're just tools. They don't make you a warrior. Discipline, humility, respect, that's what makes a warrior. You forgot that today. He turned back to the general. Don't ruin their careers, Marcus. They've learned their lesson. A painful one, I'd wager. He glanced at Rhino's wrist, which was already starting to swell. Let them stay, but I want them here. Tomorrow morning. 0500 with me. General Thorne looked from Silas to the three stunned soldiers and back again. A slow smile spread across his face. A master class with the ghost himself. Sergeant, you and your men just received the greatest gift of your careers, though I doubt it will feel like it. You will be here. 0445 Yes, General. The three of them chorused, their voices a mixture of terror and dawning awe. Silas nodded, then walked over to the front desk where Airman Jessica Riley was trying to make herself invisible. He leaned on the counter. Thank you, young lady, he said, his eyes twinkling. You've got good instincts. You kept a cool head. I was just following procedure, sir, she stammered, blushing. Procedure is a guideline, Silas said softly. Doing the right thing when it's hard, that's character. Don't ever lose that. He gave her a small wink, then turned and walked toward the exit, the general falling into step beside him. The next morning, at 0445, the gym was silent and dark. Rhino, Martinez, and Jensen stood waiting on the mats, their new white belts feeling like badges of shame. They were nervous, humbled, and profoundly afraid. At precisely 0500, Silas Vance walked in, dressed in the same gray sweats and olive t-shirt. He carried no gear. He simply walked to the center of the mat. The first lesson, he said, his voice filling the quiet space, is about seeing. Not with your eyes, but with your mind. The fight is won or lost before the first hand is ever raised. For the next 2 hours, he didn't teach them a single strike or hold. He taught them how to stand, how to breathe, how to watch a man's shoulders, his hips, his feet. He taught them to feel the shift of air as someone moved. He spoke of history, of honor, of the quiet responsibility that came with possessing great strength. He rebuilt them from the inside out. The story of what happened in the gym that day became a quiet legend at Fort Bragg, a cautionary tale whispered from one generation of soldiers to the next. It wasn't about the fight. It was about the lesson. It was a reminder that the most dangerous man in the room is often the one you see the least, and that true strength is not the power to dominate, but the wisdom to be humble and the grace to forgive. The greatest heroes often wear no medals on their chest, only the quiet dignity of a life given in service. It's a powerful truth to remember, and if stories like this one resonate with you, they serve as a testament to the unseen giants who walk among us. By sharing these narratives, we keep their legacy of quiet honor alive for a new generation.